At number 10, we'll start off a little light with Jewelcraft. Jewelcraft is a toy created by Jewelcrafters, which allows you to play a mini-game in-game, very similar to Bejeweled, Candy Crush, or my favorite tile-matching game, Honey Pop. With the inclusion of Jewelcraft to the game with Legion, we have our very first true mini-game in-game, which can be played anywhere. Well, I mean, there's also the engineering toy as well, called Blinkatron Circuit Design Tutorial, but that game is much harder to play and isn't as pick up and play for a few seconds friendly like Jewelcraft is. Jewelcraft is great for playing between pools during raids, or while waiting around Dalaran for a queue to pop. Back in Wrath of the Lich King, there were two very popular add-ons created by PopCap Games called Bejeweled and Peggle. The Bejeweled and Peggle games were pretty much exactly the same as their World versions, only you could play them in WoW. But they never really got much support after Wrath, and I've only heard reports of people getting them to work in current WoW, but I haven't been able to find a working version of either of them myself. The footage you're seeing on screen was obtained through a Wrath server where they're still considered up to date. So Jewelcraft is a nice throwback to the popular in-game add-on, and a suitable alternative. Now it's only a matter of time before they also put a Peggle toy in-game as well. Also, yes, Jewelcraft can be used by non-Jewelcrafters as well. Once you learn it, all your toons can use it, no matter their professions. The best way to play it is to zoom all the way into first-person mode and hit Alt+Z to hide your UI. The number displayed when you connect the pieces is your current score, not the amount of points you got for that move. Since there's no other UI to the game itself, you track your progress by that number alone. Once you get 2,500,000 points, you'll get an achievement called Hot Swapper. Then you can take your skills and go out and beat Honey Pop, no problem. There's also an achievement for hitting level 20 in the Blingatron game, but that one is way harder to get. Number 9, the Barnacle-Encrusted Gem. This item, obtained from a random order hall mission at your mission table, allows you to turn yourself into a giant lobster monster. But it also allows you to both walk on the seafloor and breathe underwater for 10 minutes. Sounds great, right? The only item in game which is straight up allows you to do water walking, a feat only really available in Vashj'ir and that one underwater zone in Siramar. But there's a catch. Doing pretty much anything breaks the costume, and the buffs along with it. Attacking something? It's broken. Get attacked? It's broken. Grab something that doesn't require combat? Well, it actually stays. And that's its most useful feature. It also works in any zone and not just the Broken Isles like a lot of Legion toys, which is a big plus, since there are a handful of quests at lower levels which require you to go around and collect stuff underwater. Plus, the underwater breathing is pretty useful for collecting the orbs if you're trying to get the jellyfish mount, since a lot of them are hidden in underwater caves blocked by many obstacles. If you're on a class or race which has no underwater buffs, this is pretty great. But since it's broken by any kind of combat, its uses are very limited. Its underwater walking effect and costume are both pretty unique though, so I thought it should get a mention on this list, just not at a high spot. Number 8, the Majestic Elderhorn Hoof. This item, obtained by killing the albino Elderhorn rare mob, who runs around High Mountain, gives you a pretty nice 30% increased mount speed buff, but only in High Mountain. A 30% extra speed boost to your mount is high enough to definitely be noticeable, while on classes that don't have the 20% extra mount speed baseline buff anyway, like Paladins or DKs. And is great to have handy if you ever have any kind of quest to do in High Mountain. At a duration of 10 minutes, it should be available to do a handful of world quests, and allow you to get to them 30% faster. Its zone restriction is a major drawback though, but in the way that I wish there was an item like this for every zone, not just High Mountain. So it's another item only useful in very limited situations, but should be more useful in more situations in Legions than the previous 2 entries, since a free 30% speed boost to your mount for 10 minutes, even if it's only locked to one zone, is still pretty good. When you're in that zone, that is. Number 7, Gunshoes. This item, crafted by engineers, but usable by anyone, gives you guns on your shoes that allow you to move at 200% movement speed and float over water for 25 seconds. Now, this is a pretty significant speed boost for a very long time. Why doesn't everybody use these all the time then? Well, they can't be used while in combat. So, no using them to run away from dangerous mobs like the Swift Speed Potion. Also, cannot be used inside, so not very useful for old raid runs to get to the next boss quickly, like a Swift Speed Potion would be. In fact, why even use this item over a Speed Potion? Well, because it can be used before you enter combat, and the effect doesn't break on damage. So if you need to speed run through a pack of mobs without worrying about being dismounted, or worrying about having to swim through water, these shoes are more than enough. With a duration of 25 seconds, that's more than enough time to get through almost any situation in which these would be useful. And it can be used in raids and dungeons, just only in outdoor areas in raids and dungeons. So it has some uses there, just not a lot. If this item could only be used while already in combat, it would be so much better in a higher place on this list. If its effect broke after entering combat, it wouldn't even be on this list, as it would be completely useless. So instead, it's on this list towards the bottom of the list, since it is useful, like the other items mentioned so far, but not in too many situations, but in more situations than the previous one, since running quickly through large packs of mobs is a situation that occurs often in Legion. Now, if only they weren't so expensive. Number 6, the Pump Action Bandage Gun. This item, created by engineers, gives a short 6-second hot to whoever you use it on that heals them for a minor amount of health. Now, what's interesting about this item is that its hot is off the global cooldown and doesn't share a cooldown with healing potions, nor does it apply the bandage debuff. This item gives classes with no self-healing, like warriors, a third healing option. Or just a third healing option to other classes that do have self-healing, but not very good self-healing, like the pure DPS classes. Having a third healing option is huge, and incredibly useful in situations in which you just need a tiny bit of extra healing, similar to situations in which you would use a healing potion or a bandage. By the way, I should probably mention here that healing potions no longer share cooldown with regular potions, so everyone should have some of them since they are actually really good to just have around on any class, as they provide a ton of instant single target healing for emergency situations. I only say that because I'm almost certain someone will mention in the comments that they never knew about this change. Also, you no longer have to heal up the Green Dragon in ICC to get to Sindragosa while soloing Ice Crown. You can simply run around here and go through the gate into the next room. I only mentioned that here as well because soloing that fight on a class that can't heal others is made easier with this item as well. And I'm pretty sure people don't know that you can just run around Valithria now. And since it's off the global cooldown, you could actually just macro it into your abilities to use off cooldown for a small heal every minute. After all, each pump action bandage does have 20 charges. The only downside to this is that each gun is pretty expensive. They go for about 1,000 gold for each on my server, but I hear the average is about 500 gold on other servers. You do get 20 charges per gun, so it's worth it to have one lying around. But unless you're a really rich auction house player, you probably don't want to macro the gun into your normal rotation. Number 5, Oralius' Whispering Crystal. Now, this item is actually an item obtained from a quest in your Lunarfall Inn or Frostwall Tavern in your garrison. So it's not technically a Legion item, but it is a useful item for Legion. You see, this item will give you 100 extra stats to all your primary stats, so your class stats, strength, intellect, or agility, plus 100 stamina, for 1 hour on a 15-minute cooldown. The downside to this buff, which is good for literally every single class and spec in the game, is that it counts as your flask, so you can't use one of the much better Legion-specific flasks while using this item. So, why is this item useful? Well, those flasks are expensive. And even if they weren't, there are a lot of cheap players who would rather just use this flask rather than waste a good one while out doing world quest or random dungeons. It's a flask you use in situations in which you don't really need a stat boost from the expensive Legion flasks, but would like a stat boost anyway. And it's easy to get and reusable, making it incredibly useful even if its buff is pretty minor in the grand scheme of things, and outdated. Another cool thing about this flask item is that if you forgot to bring a flask to raid, you can just use this item to trick most add-ons that check player buffs to make sure they have a flask, allowing you to ride under the radar as long as you don't die more often than once every 15 minutes. Since, unlike regular flasks, this buff does go away when you die. Number 4. Drums of Fury. Now, these drums aren't actually a Legion item as well, but there is a Legion equivalent to them that does exactly the same thing as this item. But Drums of Fury can be made by any class. What you do to get this item cheaply and to be made by any class, regardless of your profession, is simply build a level 1 tannery in your garrison, and a level 1 trading post. With a level 1 tannery, you can have the NPC at the building craft this item for you, and you can trade garrison resources for the materials needed to craft the drums at the trading post. With just collecting the garrison resources you get for free every day from your cache, you can have a near infinite supply of Drums of Fury for yourself. Now, building a level 1 tannery and trading post does cost gold, about 300 in fact, so it's not free to make them, but it is extremely cost effective. Now, what's so great about Drums of Fury? Well, the drums give you a lesser version of Bloodlust, 25% increased haste instead of 30%. For the same duration, it causes the same sated debuff. So if you have a Bloodlust user in your raid, you don't need to use these drums. But if you do not have someone who can use Bloodlust in your raid or Mythic Plus group, these drums are necessary, since a Ghetto Bloodlust is still way better than having none at all. This might be the only item on this list that is actually a necessary item, but since it's only necessary in some situations, and almost never necessary in raids, it's not quite at the top of the list in the most useful Legion items. I mainly only use them now in random dungeon groups to down bosses faster if we don't have a Bloodlust, or if we do and our Bloodlust user just doesn't bother to use it at all, which happens way more often than you'd think. Number 3, the Demonsteel Stirrups, Stonehide Leather Barding, and Leystone Hoofplates. These 3 items combined together give your mount a lot of pretty nice benefits, like 20% extra movement speed, the ability to collect quest items and gather while not dismounting, and immunity to daze effects while mounted, so you can just run through whatever packs of mobs you want. Individually, the Demonsteel Stirrups are probably the best of the 3, since those are the ones that allow you to collect stuff while mounted. The Leystone Hoofplates give the 20% extra mount speed, which is useless for 2 classes since it doesn't stack with similar effects. And the Stonehide Leather Barding allows you to not be dazed while mounted, which is a pretty great effect, but could be less useful depending on who you ask. Whatever the case, all 3 can be used at the same time. Each one lasts for 2 hours and doesn't go away when you die. If you're a blacksmith, the Demonsteel Stirrups and the Leystone Hoofplates will last 8 hours. And if you're a leather worker, the Stonehide Leather Barding will last 8 hours. But the baseline effect of 2 hours is still more than long enough for them to be useful. These items only work on the Broken Isles, and until recently, the buff for them would go away if you went into any zone that wasn't considered the Broken Isles. But most of the bugs for these items have been fixed with the recent patch. So they won't go away if you enter a different zone, the effects just won't work until you get back to the Broken Isles. I should probably mention, all of these effects are the same as the stables benefits from the garrison. So Blizzard basically included those bonuses from that building into various craftable items for Legion. And the Heirloom mount is the only mount in game that will not dismount you if dazed baseline, but that mount is locked at the slower 60% increase speed, so it's not worth using at higher levels unless you really want to run through a pack of mobs and don't mind going a little bit slower and don't have any other way to get through them quickly. Number 2, Bear Tartar and Fighter Chow. These two food buffs give very unique food buffs that have all kinds of usefulness outside of raiding or other endgame level stuff, where just using the normal stat food is way better. Bear Tartar will give you a 70% increased run speed buff for 6 seconds after killing an enemy. The great thing about this buff is that it works on literally any kind of kill, no matter where you're at. Well, actually, I don't think it works in PvP, but I haven't actually tried that, so it doesn't really matter. What this does mean is that speed running old raids and dungeons is made a cakewalk with this food. It's so good, in fact, that I made it a point to level my alts to level 101 just to use this food when I was farming the Wrath raids for the new pets that were added to the game recently, since having the sprint buff after every kill just made those raids so much faster to get through. And as for the Fighter Chow, that's my go-to food on characters I'm leveling up through Legion, or when I was out doing world quests on my Shadow Priest when his gear wasn't the greatest yet. Fighter Chow increases your out-of-combat health regeneration by 1000%, meaning you never have to stop and heal yourself up after killing a few mobs. And the only time you really ever have to stop and eat when leveling or questing is to reapply the buff. I'd say this is a mandatory item to have for classes that don't have good self-healing, and even then it's probably good for them as well, since you could just use the global cooldowns you would have used to heal yourself for more damage instead. The Bear Tartar recipe has a guaranteed chance to drop from a rare bear in Stormheim, with a name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, and a small chance to drop from all the other mobs in the area around the bear. The Fighter Chow recipe can be attained doing a small breadcrumb quest chain in Zuna. First off, you have to obtain an item that has a high chance to drop from Murlocs around the north and west side of Nartharos Academy. I got mine on my very first try when I was getting footage for this video. The item will give you a quest, which when turned in, will send you on another quest to talk to Okuna Longtusk. Okuna will then give you a small series of quests to complete, which will eventually result in obtaining the Fighter Chow recipe. If you quested through Azuna, you probably already have it if you followed the main storyline. But Bear Tartar is a little bit more out of the way to obtain, so you probably have to go and fight the rare to get that. And finally, number 1 will be a series of items that all work the best together, but are useful individually as well. And those 4 items are the Brulfist Idol, Emerald Winds, Rocfeather Skyhorn Kite, and the Flightmaster's Whistle. The Flightmaster's Whistle is basically the most useful item in Legion currently, but you get it for free by just unlocking world quests, so everyone has it. Putting the whistle at the top of the list by itself would be like putting the Hearthstone at number 1. Sure, it's extremely useful, but you kinda just get it for free without having to do anything. Now, the other 3 items require some work to get, but first, let's talk about what they do. The Brulfist Idol simply sends you straight up into the air. When it was first put into the game, it sent you nearly as high as Aviana's Feather used to, but then it was nerfed to barely higher than a jump. But then it was changed again to be less than its first form, but higher than its second. So it's a nice middle ground. The jump is about as high as the fountain in Dalaran, to give you a good vantage point. The Rocfeather Skyhorn Kite is exactly the same as the Goblin Glider. It propels you forward and gives you the slow fall effect for a minute. In the Kite's first form, it had a 2-minute cooldown, actually making it better than the Goblin Glider, which has a 3-minute cooldown. But it was later nerfed to have a 15-minute cooldown. So it's still a free Goblin Glider every 15 minutes, but you might want to carry around a couple of gliders just in case it's on cooldown. And the Emerald Winds toy throws you up into the air a little bit and then gives you an extra action button which will allow you to jump again, as long as you're still in the air. It's basically a sky jumping ability, similar to the Skywalk from One Piece if you're an anime fan. With a combination of the Idol, Kite, and Emerald Winds, and if used from a high enough location, you can essentially fly anywhere you want in the Broken Isles. So, how do you get these 3 items? Well, the Brulfist Idol can be purchased from the Totem Vendor right outside Thunder Totem in High Mountain, after you've progressed far enough in the High Mountain storyline and have completed the quest Unexpected Allies. So if you've already quested through High Mountain, you can just go to the vendor and pick it up. The Rocfeather Skyhorn Kite is a little trickier to get. The Kite is obtained by combining 4 different items found at sometimes hard to get to locations in High Mountain, which you'll see on screen. And the Emerald Winds toy can be obtained from completing Aviana's minigame and gathering all 10 orbs in High Mountain. The trick for completing this challenge is, first, don't be mounted when you accept the challenge. Second, use your mouse to turn, and look downwards the entire time. You'll get a buff each time you get an orb, so it's easy to track your progress that way. If you fail the challenge, it's a really long run back up the mountain. So just preemptively use your slow fall and momentum to get to the nearest flight point in Valshara, and just fly back up and try again, since there is a flight point really close to Aviana. Once you complete the challenge, you'll get an achievement, and the Emerald Winds toy will be mailed to you, so just check your mailbox to get it. Alright, and that's it for the video. Any other super useful Legion items I may have missed? I'd love to hear about them, since I was able to make this video with some suggestions from the last video I made about useful items.